It's Thistle and Verse, and today I'm here to do the genre book tag. The creator of this tag is Harriet Rosie. I'll include their link in the description box below. I was tagged many years ago by Simone XO and Co. I think it's been at least 2 years at this point. And it's really sad because I've had the answers drafted pretty much as soon as she tagged me. And when I finally sat down to film it, I was like looking over my notes. I was like, oh wow, like none of these answers really apply anymore. I'm gonna have to re-script this video. So that happened. Also, I just realized as I was doing this tag, I didn't realize how many genres there were. Like, I really don't stray very far outside of my neck of the woods. So this was definitely a learning moment where I had to pull up like an article about the lists of common genres. So all that out of the way, let's get into the tag video. So the first question is, what's your favorite genre? So we know I'm about speculative fiction. Fantasy, I'm not super duper picky about. And when it comes to sci-fi, I do tend to lean more towards like space operas. Like I do read a lot of dystopians just because it feels like there's a lot of that written, but that isn't necessarily like my go-to if I had like all the choices in the world, you know? I'm getting more into horror. It's definitely not like as big for me as fantasy, but I'm getting a little bit more into it. And I would say that when I read horror, I tend to read this stuff where people are always debating, like, is this horror or not? Like, I'm really not big on gore. It's kind of bad. Like, I will read something gory and it'll just kind of like stop me in my tracks for like 30 minutes. Like, I kind of can't do anything after that, so I really don't seek it out. I cannot do like serial killers or like slashers or anything like that. So, least favorite genres are, but if we're talking about like a genre that like I actually read somewhat and is like my least favorite, that would probably be memoirs. I feel like memoirs are very hit or miss. Writing style aside, I feel like sometimes if it feels like the person's life is just like super ordinary, like I'm not really interested in it. I feel like memoirs are just hard to do. Like you kind of have to have like a knack for writing and also like picking out like the interesting points in your life and like also being like self-aware, I think, about how you got to where you are today and also like being willing to share that, like being vulnerable. So for a genre you want to try, I mentioned this a little bit already in my reading in the New Year's book tag and in my New Year's book tag, but paranormal romance or urban fantasy, like I grew up during the vampire boom, so like I did read a decent amount of paranormal romances and some urban fantasies as well actually, but I really don't know if I've read very many of those by Black authors, and so I want to read more of those by Black authors. Genre you don't want to try, political thrillers. I read a few thrillers and like they're kind of like okay, but like for me that's something I'd rather watch on TV. And I'm just like I don't understand politics. It's very confusing to me. So like political thrillers just don't sound super interesting to me. A genre you're not sure about is mystery for me. Like I read Sherlock Holmes and stuff as a kid or like Encyclopedia Brown, like kind of like short one-offs. I haven't read too many like full length mysteries. Like I feel like it could be interesting because I do kind of like, well, actually I don't know if I do. I kind of like puzzling through stuff. I kind of like books that feel like a puzzle and that feel like a little bit more interactive, but also I feel like the mysteries I liked were ones where I was just kind of on autopilot. Like there's no way I was gonna guess who it was, and so I was just like watching the main character figure it out and being like, "Oh wow, they're really smart. How do they do that?" So like I feel like I could go either way with mysteries. And then next question is a genre blend you love. I love a mix of science fiction and fantasy. Like I love there are aliens, but also there are gods. There are robots and magic. Like I really like that combination. I also really like fantasy and romance as a blend. I've liked sci-fi and fantasy together for a while. Fantasy and romance was like a more recent realization after I started reading N.K. Jemisin and being like, oh, I could actually use a little bit more of the romance subplot here. And the last question is a genre-defying book, and for that I would say The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. Is it sci-fi? Is it fantasy? Who knows? I don't care to argue it. I tend to call it sci-fi. I think that physics and things like that really like undergirds the first book at least. I think as the story goes on, though, it becomes a lot more amorphous. I would also say that The Deep by River Solomon, it takes a very science fiction approach to mermaids, which has mostly been in the fantasy realm. I would also say, again, by River Solomon, Sorrowland, it is very difficult, I think, to describe Sorrowland's genre niche when I talk about it to people. There's like horror elements, there are science fiction elements. I could also see people arguing it as a fantasy. But I feel like fantasy is just kind of like the big catch-all, and like when people don't know what to do with stuff that's very obviously like not realistic fiction, it just kind of gets tossed into fantasy. Like for example, Queen of the Conquered by Case and Calendar is something that I had read was pitched as a fantasy, like in marketing and stuff. And like I initially went with that framing, and then I thought about it, and I was like, this feels kind of science fiction to me in some ways. Like it's in a fake world, so I can see why people call it fantasy right away as their go-to. And there's like magic in world, but to me the magic was like all like psychic abilities, and so to me that read like psychic abilities, mutants, that read to me more sci-fi upon reflection, and that's kind of more how I categorize it now. So that was everything. If you like the questions and you feel compelled to do the tag video, like please tell me. I'd love to watch it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care and have a good one. Goodbye.